All right, good evening. It is 6 p.m. Tuesday, January 28th, City Council meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that the press and public were duly notified of the meeting in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. Join me in standing for the invocation, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Father, we thank you for the day. Nice to see sunshine. Thank you for the beauty of it. Thank you for the opportunity we have to serve this great community. Just pray that you will guide our conversations and discussions and decisions tonight. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Cole, roll call.
Councilmember Streetman.
Here.
Councilmember Pierce.
Here.
Councilmember Anderson.
Here.
Councilmember Ward.
Here.
Councilmember Goshen.
Here.
Councilmember Myers.
Here.
Councilmember Hahn.
Here.
Councilmember Carroll. Here. Mayor Pounds.
Here.
You have a quorum?
Thank you. First item, citizens' comments.
No one has signed up.
Okay, thank you. Next item is election of mayor pro tem. On this one, we'll take recommendations in order, vote on it in order, and the first person with majority wins.
Mr. Mayor?
Rusty,
I would like to nominate Jimmy Ward, Mayor Pro Tem.
Second.
Jan,
I would like to nominate John Bogosian.
Second.
thank you.
One more nomination. That's right.
Good. All right, Nicole.
Let me figure out how I'm going to write this down so that I don't.
Oh,
mess it
sorry.
up. That's all right.
Too
I don't
fast.
want to mess it up.
You wouldn't do that.
Councilmember Carroll. How would you like to vote?
Are we just choosing a
We're
name?
voting
Let's
first
start
on
Ward, right?
Jimmy, right?
Yeah.
Right, so I've got to go down in that, and I was just going to go the opposite way. That's okay. And then once I get to a majority, isn't that correct?
So I think you would go on Ward first,
Yeah.
and then I think
Right,
you
I'm-
would go on.
You're just doing roll call vote on Jimmy Ward first.
Yea or
See if
nay
he
on
gets
that?
Roll call vote?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Or
So
we can do it
how-
by show of hands, whatever's easiest.
let's do a show of hands, but don't put them down right away, please. So I can get it all. Okay, so, Councilmember Ward.
Okay.
Can Katie vote?
Yes.
Katie, you're gonna have to tell us your show of hands.
Nay.
Okay. Well, that's a majority vote. That was 5.
That was
Yeah.
fine.
That's it.
Yes,
Okay, that's it.
so it's Councilmember Ward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim, I'll give you the hotline number for the mayor's help.
I've been on vacation.
Yeah. Next item is a special presentation, discussion of beach conditions and consideration of funding additional protective measures. Mr. Trainum is with us tonight. Stephen, thank you as always for joining us. I know Douglas, you may hop in here too, but Stephen, take it away. Thank you.
Sure, happy to be here again. I was able to drive the beach with Doug earlier today from one to the other, and able to kind of report that the beach right now is in as good a condition as we've seen it any time recently within the past year, outside of a couple of isolated hot spots. So the south end right now, there's a dry sand beach from one end to the other.
Is that
Get a
on?
little closer. I think it's on.
Okay.
It's on. Okay. Right now, the worst kind of active erosion area is in the 500 block. It's not to the point where it has been, but it's getting pretty close. There are a couple of properties there that the pools are getting pretty close to that 20-foot criteria, but that's where the dune escarpment was, but the active high tide line is not getting anywhere near that. There's still a very significant dry sand beach in front of it, and that's largely due to some pretty favorable weather we've had the past month. We have not had any high tide events from January really through the end of March. There are no tides predicted to be greater than 6 feet. So once we get to the end of the March, there's a couple of a little over 6 foot tides, and then towards the end of April is kind of the next close to king tide event. So we're in a pretty good window right now as far as the tides go, and we're seeing that being reflected on the condition of the beach. So again, from the Breach Inlet area, there's actually more sand kind of in the intertidal shoal on the Breach Inlet side than we've seen in a very long time. And all the sandbags are not being touched by the water down on that end. So it's it's in a pretty favorable condition as you go. Again, there's kind of a little bit of a narrower beach in that 500 area. As you go north towards the pier, the beach is in fairly good shape. We're seeing some dune recovery, but we need several months of that if there's, just we're depending on nature before we see any really significant dune recovery. And I will caveat that while things are looking good and favorable, we have favorable winds and tides. So one storm could really impact, the area again. While there is a good dry sand berm that will help dissipate wave energy before it reaches the dunes. So we're in a pretty good spot. I don't want to put too much confidence on, hey, we're out of any kind of erosional issue down there right now. Something we certainly need to keep watching, but we're in a better position now than we've been on that south end. As you go north of the pier, the beach is in very, very good shape. From the pier all the way up to close to 53rd Avenue. There's an erosional arc kind of south of the Grand Pavilion area around 58th, 59th, not really impacting any properties there. There's a pretty healthy beach in front of the Grand Pavilion area. And then our main still critical erosion areas around the Seagrove and Beechwood East area and Wild Dunes. You can clearly see a gap in the shoal in that area where waves are continuing to just kind of reach through that shoal, impact the beach, drive sand in both directions away from that area, and that's why it's the hot spot. So that area, we are recommending some additional sandbags. Doug, help correct me if I'm wrong here, but at the last time we approved bags, we approved, I believe, a $50,000 allocation, which was a little over 100 bags. We have several weeks ago, we requested the contractor install those bags. He's had some health issues and some equipment issues, so I think those bags are going in very soon. It was either 40 or 60 we recommended, but I think we need to go ahead and probably recommend close to that full 100 bags for those couple of properties there, because they've seen some slumping of bags and just kind of continue to be hit during any kind of wave event. So that it's a very narrow area. It's probably only 5 or 6 properties right now that are kind of in that erosional hotspot. As you start to go to the east, where the timber seawall is, pretty much east of there is in pretty good shape.
So Stephen, Ocean Club and all are looking.
Ocean Club and Seascape, we added additional bags there several months ago, and really the beach hasn't changed very much at all there. The water may get to the bags periodically, but for the most part, the tides haven't even gotten to the bags, and the beaches remain in a pretty stable configuration. That area does need to be watched over the next 12 months. The shoal is essentially attached now. You can pretty much skip to it, or maybe a long jump, maybe not a skip. But within the next week or two, you'll be able to walk out onto that shoal at low tide without getting your feet wet.
So the water hasn't been underneath the foundation of the Ocean Club in recent?
Not since we've added the sandbags and to that. Originally, it was reaching the foundation of it. The sandbags have done a good job of kind of holding that line. I honestly was anticipating more erosion there over the last month, but it's held up pretty well, so that's pretty good. The biggest risk with that area is the shoal's attaching now. We can't tell you, is it going to attach as kind of like from the center and spread out, or there's so much sand out there that an arm may kind of work its way around to the north. And if that happens, it's going to just prolong the time it takes for the sand to start spreading to the north. But the fact that the beach has been fairly stable is a pretty good sign that we're, in a less of an erosion condition that we could be in that area. So it still needs to be watched. I wouldn't be surprised if we needed to do some maintenance or additional bags in that area over time. But that also kind of plays into where we're at with the shoal management project. So as far as that goes, the last word I heard from Fish and Wildlife Service, who is currently the entity that's kind of, say, holding up the permit, but they're the next ones that have to respond. They have to issue a biological opinion. The latest I heard is they're supposed to be working on that in March. They are very tied up and short-staffed, and that's the update I have. So unfortunately, that's a little later than we would like to get it. Ideally, we could be working out there next month once the shoal's attached, but we don't really have any control over that from our end. So We've reached out to them to try to tell them the urgency in getting this moving forward so that we can get out there and work before sea turtle season and just to avoid the emergency conditions that we're in now. And just haven't been real successful in getting that moved along faster.
Steve, is March when you're anticipating the permit is issued or when they're going to get to it?
That's when they're supposed to get to their issuing their biological opinion. Then once they issue that, the state, I believe, is prepared to issue their permit very quickly after that. And then the Corps has to wait on the state permit to be issued before they issue theirs. That's usually another week or two at the quickest to get this Corps permit issued after the state permit. So I think optimistically, we're looking at April as the earliest possible time for construction. It may push into May under the current schedule. Yes.
That's for the renourishment at the east end of the island.
That's for the shoal management
Shoal
project.
management project.
Correct.
What's the schedule for the Corps that said they would start, 2 years ago on the Breach Inlet side? Where are we now with that?
Sure. I spoke with one of the contractors today, and we had an update, and I know the mayor's been in contact with the Corps on that. So the latest that we've heard is that they are now supposed to finish the Sullivan's project at the end of February. It's
Jeez.
been January, it's been December, it's
Yeah.
same type of thing.
6 months ago.
What has happened with that is the contractor had been using a conveyor system to move sand from the inner portions of these islands over the dike and in front of the dredge. That's had a lot of problems and been pretty slow. They've worked with the Corps to remove that system, so now they're able to dump sand directly in front of the dredge. And this past week, looks like they have done a lot more work than certainly the month before that. Over at Sullivan's, I was there today, and you actually saw a very large deposit of sand out in that low tide that they've been working. So it looks like they are getting faster. I think they may have overestimated how much work they had done to date and had more to do than the last update we heard, when we thought that they were getting really close to being done at the end of the year. So they are, I believe, and I don't know that for certain, but I believe they were kind of catching up to the volume that they were missing their estimate on.
And what happens during sea turtle nesting season?
So they will be required to, they will be allowed to continue working, but they will be required to follow all of the endangered species protection measures that Fish and Wildlife and the Corps have placed on that project. So they will have monitors on the beach. They will be doing the daily morning patrols. Should our supplemental work be occurring during that time, we would just have to coordinate with the turtle team here, which we are used to doing, to do the daily morning patrols before any of our work can be done.
Okay, thank you.
I have been told that they are getting very close to signing the agreement to dredge the Breach Inlet Channel, which would occur before they do the remainder of this spoil beneficial use project. So that's another 50 to 60,000 cubic yards of sand that they are going to be placing on Isle of Palms for free, and also opening up the navigation and the waterway. They will be able to do that at a more rapid pace than what they're doing now. So hopefully we'll have a nice initial slug of sand coming out as they start up. And I've also been told they're probably going to try to dredge directly out of the third and fourth islands rather than excavate it, stockpile it, and then dump it over. They'll actually put the dredge in these spoil islands, disposal islands, and dredge the material directly. That may change, but they're leaning towards that, which may make it more efficient. So I don't want to sound too optimistic that things will be going a lot faster, but I've been told that as long as the city is willing to kind of wait, that the Corps is going to keep moving forward with the project and give you, your over 500,000 yards of sand.
So so they finish up at the end of February at Sullivan's, then they're going to do the 50,000 cubic yard dredge. How long does that, for them to relocate, set it up, do the dredge, are we talking a month, 2 months, 3 months? Do we know?
I think it'd only take a few days to transition to the dredging the channel. It's the same pipe, it's the same dredge, it's all the same equipment, so they just have to reposition it a little bit. So you maybe give them a week to do that repositioning. I've been told that dredge can move 6,000 to 8,000 yards of sand per day when it's directly dredging. So you're looking at maybe 10 days to 2 weeks of actual dredging of that material.
And that material is going to be directly deposited on the Isle of Palms?
Yes,
Where?
between 2nd Avenue and 9th Avenue.
Okay.
Are they going to start at second, because I've heard they've been going second, then ninth, and second, then are they, which end will they be starting at, do you know?
The last I heard was towards the south end. So far, it seems like the Corps and the contractor are willing to at least hear our guidance on what we think would be in the best interest of the city, based off the conditions at the time. So if we would like them to start, where the beach is most eroded, we'll try to do that. And also have them positioning the sand where it's going to last the longest, where, not putting it all right at Second Avenue where it's likely to just move south, and kind of out of the system. We want it where it's going to feed the system over time.
Okay, so if they start, that sounds like a March timeframe for starting sand on the beach, and if it's taken about 6 months to do 200,000 cubic yards on Sullivan's, and we're looking at 550,000 on IOP, are we looking at a 8, 10, 12-month I mean, we initially had estimated 4, and now it's taken 6 to do 40% of the volume over on Sullivan's. Because that puts us right in high season.
Right. I
And
do
hurricane
anticipate
season,
that I would say 6 months at a minimum.
At a minimum.
Yeah, it may go a little longer than that. If they do prove that they can move pretty quickly with the direct dredging, that may accelerate your time frame a little bit. The good news with it is it's a very localized impact. It's not your typical beach nourishment project where you're shutting down 1,000 feet of beach. Essentially, they have one excavator on site right at the pipe discharge. They may close down a 100-foot section of beach, and people are usually able to walk on the backside of it, so you can actually get from one side to the other. But as far as kind of the recreational intertidal beach area, there would be a fairly limited footprint.
Even with our moving equipment.
Any work that the city would do would be more involved because you're trucking sand from wherever we're harvesting it from, potentially all the way up to 9th Avenue or 10th Avenue. So we would try to, hopefully we can get most of that done before the peak of the season, Memorial Day. We need to give them, probably a month to get material out that then we can harvest and move. So it'll be cutting pretty close into the season on our work.
So the pipe would not go all the way to 9th Avenue. They pump the sand up down your Second in that area there, and then we truck it up?
Their work will extend from Second Avenue all the way to 9th in segments. They will add pieces of pipe as they go. It's longer pieces of pipe, so it's not like a continuous nourishment where they add 40-foot pieces. They may move a couple of 100 feet, pump sand out for a while, move a couple of 100 more feet out. So their pipe will be continuous as they go up the beach.
Mm-hmm. What kind of effect do they think dredging Breach Inlet will do for either the inlet or our beach? Is there going to be any cause and effect on that? Will it
The dredging
help
they're
the
doing
flow
is
in and
back
out of the inlet?
waterway, adjacent to those islands, so it's not actually out here near the bridge or anything like that. So it's not having any.
So it's back on the
impact.
creek side between there and the waterway?
Yes.
Okay.
Any more questions on the core project?
Stephen, real quick on the, back up on the Shoal project. So that's had some pretty significant movement in the last month or so towards
Yes.
the shore, sounds like.
Yes, we've seen a lot of landward movement. The other thing we've seen is a lot of vertical growth. So we're seeing more sand exposed at low tide. And that actually continues down in front of that area in Beechwood East. There's and I have some photos from today I'll share with Doug and he can pass along to y'all. But there's a lot more visible sand than in really any shoal that we've seen since 2007 when the last very large-scale shoal had attached. So that's great news. It's a lot more free sand coming. It's going to require, if we're able to work today, we would have to decide how much sand we would want to recommend being moved total in the project, how much would go towards the Beechwood area, how much would go towards Ocean Club. So that's kind of a decision that needs to be made kind of right at the start of construction based off of the conditions. But overall, it's a lot of sand coming in.
So Stephen, if that shoal is almost attached, right, and we're still waiting on a permit, we thought all this was going to kind of time out right to have a permit, be close enough to grab. I mean, if it attaches, I'm assuming we still have to have a permit to harvest
Yes.
or move around.
Yes, The emergency permit that would allow for beach scraping only applies within the extended property lines of the affected properties. So if there was a piece of the shoal that was accessible within those lines, in theory, you might could get out and get it, but that's not really the intent of those permits. But you would have to have that permit in place.
But by the time you get the permit, there could be a lot of natural movement of the sand already, right?
Certainly, there could be. I don't think it's going to happen where you see full recovery within the next 6 months. It's probably a little longer time frame. I think you're going to see reduced erosion pressures over the next 6 months, but not recovery in some of those areas.
Get the mic, John.
I'm going to back up to Beechwood. It sounds like that's a really critical area right now. And I mean, maybe this is even to Douglas, but if we have a contractor that's having issues with equipment and sickness and isn't there other contractor we can use to expedite getting those bags in place? It seems like it's pretty critical time right now for that.
There certainly would be, and I don't know if you'll recall, but we had this kind of same thing with a prior contractor. And we did. We pivoted away from that contractor because of equipment malfunctions. I think that we have always felt like, and the only order that we're waiting on right now is 40 bags. So it by his prior kind of work production, it's like a half a day of work. So we have been of the opinion it's going to happen this day. The holidays hit in there, the storm hit in there. In the middle of it, they had sewing machines go down that went back and forth. So prior to this hiccup, it was far and away much better in terms of daily production. And I will say, this is also the contractor that has worked for those individuals privately. So he has a direct line of communication with the impacted properties. He's making the adjustments to be sure that they're not in kind of critical
All right.
need.
I would just suggest that if it looks like it's going to be delayed, we try to take some other alternative action to
Yeah.
get that done. I guess the other thing is I'm confused. We have sandbags there, right? So the additional sandbags that we're doing, are they going higher or further? How are we positioning those sandbags?
The sandbags that are there have been displaced or slumped over time, and these repeated kind of wave impacts during high tide. And even if it's not a storm, that area gets hit. And there's very, very little beach, even at mid-tide, to dissipate any of that wave energy. So they're just getting beat up and need to be maintained. So a lot of it's just kind of rebuilding the height to our design, not really expanding the footprint, but just kind of restacking and replacing what's still there, but kind of settled down.
And my understanding is you're asking for more bags tonight, right?
Well, I think that the 100 or the $50,000 that has been previously approved, I think gets us back to where everybody's in a fair condition. I think it would be wise to have another approval of a similar amount to respond over the next month should we have another storm that we can respond fairly quickly.
Yeah, of the roughly 100 bags that got approved, 40 are the ones we're waiting on that should have been deployed already, but we think they'll be deployed any day. Based on today's condition, Stephen would like to put the remaining 60 that are in that allocation that you all did earlier out for those properties. So that would leave us kind of depleted with what's been approved so far. So I think to echo that
Did we approve 50 or 100? I thought we approved 100,000. Maybe I'm mistaken.
100
Bags.
100
100
bags.
bags, okay.
Yeah. So another approval of another 100 bags as kind of a safeguard to get you to your next meeting, I think would be prudent.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
I'm kind of back on the Army Corps and the scheduling and everything. And if I do the math, we're back into the season, the potential storm season, everything. What's our plan B if they don't show up again? Can we really withstand another storm season without this protection that we've been waiting for 2 years? Because every year we're kind of losing ground. Do we have a plan B? And if not, should we be working on one?
Yeah, we are working on the permit application for the next large-scale nourishment that would include both ends of the island, regardless of whether the Corps does this project or not. We want to have that included in a permit, just so that we have the ability.
Isn't that a couple of years away or a year?
It's probably close to 9 to 12 months away from issuing that permit. Right now, we are waiting on our subcontractor to collect the borings offshore to determine the borrow area that would be applicable to that end of the island. So we're
Yeah, I'm
hoping to have-
concerned with 2025. I mean, our current season, if we don't get any sand and we have another, storm season that's active, what are our plans? Are we going to be scraping and pushing and then dropping sandbags up there? Is that the plan B, or what is the plan B?
I mean, that's really only other option right now is if we return to that erosional condition where we're within that 20 foot or approaching 20 feet, then we have those options. The only other thing we could really do would be to include potentially scraping sand off of that south end as a modification to our shoal management permit. We avoided that due to some concerns from homeowners of scraping sand off of that end with this. So there's really no guarantee that comes through, but that's something we could pursue. And it would have to go back out on public notice, but wouldn't require a full 12-month review period to get through that type of modification.
But again, Stephen, you're feeling better than you have around the breach inlet end on the rebuild, just nature rebuild.
Yes, again, the historical trend down there has been
Yeah.
accretion. Things have changed up and down, and I'll speak to the east end here in a second if we have time. But it seems like things have obviously been more stable the past 6 months than they had been the prior 2 years, and it seems like that trend is continuing. Again, once we get back into spring tides or have some storm event, I'm curious to see how the beach actually responds to that. But there's more sand out there now. We will be doing our interim survey next month. So we'll have some quantified data to be able to tell you exactly how much sand has come and gone over the past 6 months, which will be great on both ends of the island. That will help direct any decisions on the shoal management project. But speaking of these kind of historical changes, I did want to mention that we've had some conversations with some of y'all and different owners up and down the beach on what other kind of options could be done. There's been mention of like groins or terminal groins. I did want to mention, like at the south end, the idea of a terminal groin. Those are done. Terminal groins are groins that are placed near the inlets as kind of the last line of littoral transport. They keep sand in place before it's able to fall into an inlet. Those are allowed in South Carolina, just like any other groin, but there's a couple of caveats that have to be considered that you really have to think about. So like at the south end, again, the historical trend has been accretion in that area. One of the conditions that the state requires for groins is you have to have a documented high erosion rate. That's a historic high erosion rate, not a 1 or 2 year rate. It's kind of have been that way for a long time. So I don't think a terminal groin at the south end would be allowed right now because your erosion rates down there just have not, you haven't had enough time for these documented long-term erosion. 4 or 5 years from now, if that area just continues to erode, I think you would have that ability to go to the state and say, yes, we have high erosion rates at that end. We've tried nourishment that's not successful, so that would work. Over at the east side, on the east end, a terminal groin could potentially be placed in that area around the 18th hole to try to help hold sand along that eastern end of the island. I think you have a high erosion rate in there that you could document based off of the historical pattern. The issue at the east end is this shoal complex where you have sometimes sand's going to the north, sometimes sand's going to the south. Groins like to work where sand's generally moving in one direction. So if you put a terminal groin out around that area, a lot of times it's going to be backing up sand and protecting that. But at other times, sand's going to be leaving the opposite end, and the groin's really not going to be doing a whole lot. It may be helpful in the long run, but it's just a little less predictable than like the groin at the south end of Folly Beach, where sand's generally moving one direction. Over at the other side, kind of the Beechwood area, where we've had repeated high erosion rates, a groin field could be used to try to hold sand in the areas that are most affected kind of repeatedly, and that's proven to be Seagrove to Dunecrest Lane. Again, the dynamics of these shoals make a groin field a little less predictable than if you were to put a groin like on a long straight beach, like the ones at Devido Beach that have been installed recently. Sand generally moves to the south, and you can predict how much sand each groin is going to trap. So I say that just because we saw after the 2008 project, the East End lost about 100,000 yards of sand per year. After the 2018 project, to date, that East End's been losing about 250,000 yards per year. So we've seen a 150% increase in the erosion rate. If that's the new trend where these types of losses are going to be occurring after every nourishment, and 4 or 5 years after every nourishment, you're back to an erosional condition. These shoal projects are great when the shoal's available and accessible. But if it's not, then you kind of don't have any other options other than doing another large-scale nourishment, even if it's only over a length of beach that may be several hundred feet long. Because right now, it's literally 10 properties or so that are the affected ones, highly affected. Again, Ocean Club is there too. So you have to weigh, is it worth doing an entire nourishment over that area? Or could structures like groins, to try to maintain some minimum healthy beach condition in that area during these erosional events. It's something that I think we can look at that could be effective in helping reduce the erosion rate once it reaches a certain point, but there's a lot of pros and cons to that. It's kind of a shift in the management scheme from trying these soft solutions and maintaining a wide sandy beach to using these structures. Again, they can be very successful, but they also are structures that are out on the beach, and they can impact people's use of the beach going from one side to the other if they're really exposed. They're not cheap to install. Each one's probably close to $1 million to $1.5 million to install. So you have to kind of weigh those things. So I just
What does
wanted
that do to the beach renourishment cost, though? I mean, that would dramatically reduce the
Right,
cost.
so
I mean, we're
if-
looking at these large renourishments, and
Right, and
they
that-
pay for itself in a,
Right, so you look at the long-term, management cost, and that's where you incorporate those initial costs over the long term. And if you're able to either eliminate the need for some of these emergency efforts or the shoal management projects, or extend your nourishment interval where, we can have enough beach in place to withstand this episodic erosion from these shoals. Because once the shoal attaches, we may not have the 500 feet of beach that we had after the last nourishment, but there will be a significant dry sand beach in front of these areas. So if we can withstand these intervals, then they've done their job. And ideally, when I've kind of thought about the different scenarios, you can look at extending, a few very long groins that are spaced further apart, or more shorter groins that are spaced closer together, which I think may be the better way to go in this situation, because they're a little more predictable with the way the sand goes back and forth. But that's exactly what you're trying to do, is extend the life of your nourishment, maintain that dry sand beach. And if the beach is healthy, then hopefully most of those structures are buried or very minimally exposed.
Stephen, how big a structure are you talking about for that price point in that area?
So we've done them anywhere from 300 feet to 750 feet. The terminal groin at Folly Beach County Park, 750 feet. Groins that are kind of at the tapered end of a cluster are generally shorter. So those are about 300 feet or so, but they would have to be tailored to the site.
And if you were going to do, would you call it a field of groin? I mean, what do you, 3, 5, what do you?
That would have to be evaluated on
determined,
what makes the most sense for that type of area. If I had to ballpark it, I would think 3 to 4 in that area, depending on the length, would be sufficient to maintain that area. Now, this is also dependent on how these shoals attach. Sometimes they attach further north, sometimes they attach further south, and that will change where these erosional hotspots are. So you may protect an area where a shoal starts to attach, 15 years from now, and there's a new hotspot down the beach.
Is there modeling that you can do with that?
You can. There are sophisticated sediment transport models, three-dimensional models that you can do. I will just say, in a situation like this where you have these shoals, a complex tide and current environment, complex wave environment, they're limited in their predictability. I don't want to over-rely on a model. I think they're good for general concepts and trends, but in this setting, It's just too complex, and you don't have sufficient data to really drive that in this type of setting.
What do the groins do to swimming ability? I know when I was growing up, my parents always said, don't go near the groins because it's not a place to swim.
Sure. They can be a hazard. They're a structure in the water, and if people aren't aware of them or used to how the currents work on a beach, and you get out on the beach not paying attention, you drift down, and suddenly you find yourself on rocks. I grew up on Edisto and was bounced around them plenty of times. But that's one of the things that you have to weigh is we've tried to manage the beach with nourishment and soft solutions based off of the history. It's a different way to manage the shoreline if it proves that nourishment alone isn't sustainable.
Stephen, the groins we have now that are buried under feet of sand all up and down the beach, that many people probably haven't seen, is that a terminal groin, or is that something less than what would be considered a terminal groin?
Those are less. I know there's one probably around 57th or 59th Avenue that we got exposed after Hurricane Matthew or Irma. Old timber groin. Those are shorter. The terminal groins are generally longer, and they're generally right adjacent to an inlet.
Okay.
I think what Rusty's talking about are rock groins.
Yeah.
There are a number of them that were put in after Hurricane Hugo. There's one at 40.
No, they were before Hurricane Hugo.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
45th, 46th, there's one, I know.
Yeah, there are
There's a
several
bunch
down
of
in
those.
that area.
Are those terminal groins?
No, again,
Those
terminal
aren't either.
groins are at the ends of the island.
Okay,
Here are the
that's
inlets.
what the term is. Okay.
When we moved here in '84, we used to crab around those.
Great for that.
Yeah, so, and
That was fun.
I don't want to take up too much time, but just part of when you apply, if that's something you're interested in, part of the groin regulations are you have to have that documented high erosion rate. You have to do a downdrift impact analysis to determine what impacts to adjacent areas of the beach a groin field may have. Obviously, groins have a reputation for causing impacts to the downdrift beach. Changes in design and the way you go about these projects have largely eliminated that, but it certainly can exist. So if you were to install groins, then you would be responsible for monitoring the beach, and should any increased erosion occur in downdrift areas, you would be responsible for mitigating that through either additional nourishment, through modifying the groin structure. So you have to do the analysis to determine that there wouldn't be those downdrift impacts. You would have to put up a bond to cover the mitigation cost for those impacts and things like that. So it's a very extensive process. It's doable. You would want to assume that a permit would be appealed and be willing to fight that battle, because pretty much everyone that has been installed in the past 30 years has been. Some have not been successfully, obtained through those appeals. So it's a long process, but I at least wanted to mention that because we've had some of those conversations, and it is a feasible alternative, but it comes with a lot of effort.
Stephen, if the group was of a mind to pursue groins, would there be time between, if they said, yeah, let's do this, is there time between now and the next renourishment? Because I guess you would want to time it with a major renourishment because you have to fill the area. Would there be time in your mind to get a permit and a groin in place and be before the next renourishment? And would that should it happen just prior to a renourishment, or would it need to
It needs to happen at the same time as a nourishment, because you want to build the structures using land-based equipment, so you're not having to pay for barges to come in and work in the ocean. So essentially, you fill the beach up with sand, and then you dig that sand out to build the structure. So you want to time it where it's occurring during or very shortly after a nourishment project. The other part of your question was.
So would we have time if
Yes.
we were to start now based on our kind of forecast of?
I believe you would, to at least get it included in the permit application. Again, a downdrift impact analysis would have to be done, which is fortunately, you have all the data that you need to do that. It just be formalizing and kind of writing up that study. But it may extend the life of the permitting window. It may take an extra 6 to 10, 12 months to actually obtain that permit. So if there's not a hard deadline on when that next nourishment may occur, which may depend on how the shoal attaches and spreads. There may be sufficient time before the next nourishment to have that approved.
But to your point, expect an appeal process. I mean, you think about Debidu, they've been in place for 2 years, and the court just finally settled 3 weeks ago.
And they originally proposed those groins in the 90s.
Yeah.
Alternatively, what if they're not on the same track and you do the groin permits separately and I don't think we want to hold up a renourishment opportunity for another year and a half of this.
And that
So why
can
not-
be done, yeah, and that's probably the way I would recommend doing it.
So what do we need to do to get that rolling if that's something we're interested in doing?
Did you say it took 30 years for the Debidu groins to be approved?
They, I can't remember the exact history, but in the 90s, they were recommended as an option. I believe there was a permit submitted that got appealed and eventually dropped. There may have been another iteration of that got appealed and dropped, and finally, Debidu decided there was no way that, they had to have them because it was not sustainable to try to keep nourishing their south end, which was, they would add 600,000 yards, and 2 years later, their seawall would be exposed. So they said they were willing to fight it out, and they were able to be successful with that. Pawleys Island recommended a terminal groin at the south end a long time ago. That also got dropped after a while. So can be a fight.
Arduous fight, okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
But Scott, to your question, it would just need to be a directive from council to,
And even if we have the permit and we decide not to do it, I mean, it gives us the option is what it does.
you certainly do not have to install it, once you have the permit.
So Douglas, you're looking for $50,000 allotment tonight for additional sandbags?
Yeah, and then, if there's a sense of whether or not you want to prolong discussions on groins, kind of next steps, if you would provide those, what's your?
My only comment is I just think it gives us, I don't know what the cost is, or we can investigate, but it just gives us another tool in the toolbox if we need to have it, and we can't keep funding these renourishments.
Start the process at least.
Yeah,
So-
I don't know what the downside would be if we.
Yeah. We can
That's what I'm asking.
put together kind of a short summary, let's call it an information packet, but just outlining some of the steps, some of the issues and that you're likely to face, potential cost, and show you some photos of some other situations just to give you a little bit more information. And maybe that's a decent starting point.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good next step. Is there a motion on the emergency measure?
So moved.
Second?
Blair, Jan,
We're approving 100 bags, is that what we're doing?
$50,000.
$50,000, which is roughly 100.
Roughly, right. Katie, sorry, do you have a question?
No.
Okay, thank you. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Stephen, thank you. As always, appreciate it. Douglas, anything else from your side? Next item is approval of previous meeting minutes. We've got city council meeting on November 12th, special city council meeting on December 10th, special city council meeting January 7th, 2025, special city council workshop January 14th, 2025. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second?
Any,
Mayor, I do have two things I need to note on that. November 12th city council meeting, it's basically a spelling error, but it's Randy Bell, not Randy Bellick. And on December 10th, under special presentation, instead of swearing in of Rusty Streetman, it's sweating in Rusty Streetman.
is that not right?
Pretty much.
Well, 40 and slip there.
That's it, thank you.
Nicole, would you do that on purpose? Kind of funny, actually.
Want to make sure we're.
Pretty good one. We've got a motion and a second as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Old business, new business, some of these we've already talked about at length at our workshop earlier this month. First one specifically, consideration of awarding a contract to Munderland Pyrotechnics for July 4th, 2025 fireworks for $40,000. You can see we have a budget amount of $45,000.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Next item, discussion of next steps for beach preservation ad hoc committee recommendations. In your packet, staff had updated the the grid to reflect next steps and/or action required. Tonight, Douglas, I think we just hit these at a high level. A little bit later, we're going to talk about establishing an ongoing beach preservation committee, so if you can take us through your piece, please.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. What I've attempted to do here is break the recommendations into really three buckets. Those that really don't need any action immediately, they're either underway or they're in the future, so there's nothing kind of pending for those to happen now.
Douglas, Amy, do you have this to put up, the yellow-green grid? Sorry. Go ahead, Douglas, sorry.
So those would, and this is page 57, Amy, if you got the packet. So those are green in your packet. They're kind of already covered. The next grouping is, they're color-coded as yellow in your packet. And these are the items that if you'll recall, part of what the Beach Ad Hoc Preservation Committee recommended was getting second opinions, engaging an outside firm to look at a number of policies and things and projects that we've done. So we have put those that we thought were appropriate to get a second opinion on in yellow. So that is, there's some money that we can talk about. We've reached out to a handful of these potential firms that would do this work. So there's more to come on the yellow group. And then we have what are color-coded as orange in your packet. And these are things that we need some type of action from council in the somewhat near future generally. And if you would like, I'd like to just kind of go through them, and we'll focus on that group tonight. The first one that's orange is the city performing emergency work. This is something you'll obviously are currently doing that. You've just authorized additional money there. So this could probably be in the yellow category of, have a second opinion, look at that practice. Or it could be green as it's ongoing, it's happening now, no action necessary. But I thought that was one that the council may want to give kind of short-term direction on. Next one is establishing property owners' responsibilities for maintaining a dune system. This one, again, this is my kind of personal perspective. I believe that probably this recommendation is tied to what the city decides to do with hard erosion control. I think, again, from my opinion, if the city were to authorize property owners to install hard erosion control devices, I think that the city council would probably tend to pivot out of paying for emergency measures and put that onus on the owners individually. So that's really a point for you all to discuss and advise back. But from my perspective, this would be a council decision and discussion, but it probably would happen in conjunction with hard erosion control discussions. Next one, and this is on your agenda later on tonight, but this is actually engaging that person, that staff, that firm to give second opinions. We have been in contact with we have a list of about 8 different firms. We've had a range of costs anywhere from a guess of $25,000 to $50,000 of work. In the packet, it's $30,000. What we have been thinking would happen here is we would basically do a request for qualifications. So get each firm that we identify as a viable option to submit their qualifications to the city, then have a process of culling that pool of respondents down to 1 or 2 based on their responses, and then get proposals from those 2 and see which one council wants to go with. That's a similar process that we follow for other requests for qualifications when we do that. So again, that's might be next on the agenda. Next item, hire a full-time employee. This is a recommendation, specifically has budget implications. I think this would naturally fall into council's upcoming budget discussions. So we need direction there, but I think you're gonna kind of naturally come to that here in the next few months.
Douglas, quick question on that. Is that something that maybe we should send to the admin committee to kind of discuss and define what the scope of that would be and maybe what the budget might be for that position?
Absolutely, we can do that. Next item, establish an ongoing beach preservation committee. This one is also on your agenda for tonight's action. I will say that in discussions about just generally the city's committees, they do not have active voting council members on them. They're advisory. So they typically have a council liaison. So I will say that the recommendation from the ad hoc committee is 5 members and 2 council members. The resolution in your packet to make this happen is 5 members and 1 council liaison. So that's a little bit of a difference, I just wanted to point out to you. And then I would say these next ones, these next items in the funding are a little bit farther out in the horizon. The first one, consider raising revenue to cover the proposed proactive beach nourishment schedule. This one, as we've talked about, the group identified a number of financial levers that could be pulled to put money into the city's beach preservation fund. So we need direction to make that happen if it's going to happen. The next 3 deal with engaging lobbyists. And the first one, just generally about securing funding for beach nourishment. That direction has been given to our lobbyists. That one could probably be color-coded in green. The next 2, one you're pretty actively, the next 2 deal with changes to state law. So I would say those are very far, those are kind of far into the future, not going to happen this year. Kind of longer range plans. And then the last one on the list is establish a cost-sharing plan with Wild Dunes. And I'll say that we have had pretty extensive conversations with the Wild Dunes staff, and their challenge is really making a commitment. I mean, kind of like your council, it's very hard for you all to commit to something 15, 20 years from now with a formal agreement and an obligation. So I would summarize their position as being similar to that. They tell us.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
They tell us that they are in good shape and they're very confident in the next large-scale renourishment project in terms of having funding available for that. They are not as confident, and they just don't have the money in their funds, in their accounts, which I understand, in those out years, especially when we look at the cost of projects forecasted out, 30 years into the future.
Yeah,
So-
and I had thought that when, at the committee, we had thought that maybe we would only have the foresight for maybe one project, and that the scope of those conversations should probably be scoped to the one, because things change
Yep.
over 30 years. I think we've got an overall cost based on what we think it's going to be over that 30-year period, but to negotiate something and have it firm for 30 years is probably not a
Right.
realistic goal. So maybe we rescope that to, and I guess on the whole funding thing, I don't know what timing, you said maybe a little down the road, not that urgent, but if we're looking at a renourishment, and I think the 22-year cycle the 8-year cycle estimated at around 23 million, and the 10-year cycle, if we adopt that, was at $27 million. And I think we realize we don't have that money, and if we don't have a commitment, we probably ought to figure out where we're going to get that if we're looking at having this for the next budget cycle. So,
Yeah,
I mean,
and I would say
hopefully,
my comments were kind of not at this meeting, but
Yeah, no, agreed with that,
sometime in
yeah.
the next, in the near future, but not something to
There
solve
there are
tonight.
2 ways to look at this problem. One is the dollar amount, but the other one is you might want to start discussions about the percentage allocated for the city versus Wild Dunes, in terms of just to start that discussion now, so that that's where I think we need to start with this discussion, not just the dollar amount.
Oh, I agree, yeah.
So at this meeting, if you all took issue with any of the kind of next steps, I guess I'd want to hear that. I'd want to hear that feedback and we can make adjustments. If something is seen, and Scott, maybe to your point, maybe the idea of starting the revenue levers it is orange, so it's on there as kind of a next step, but if there's a quicker priority that you all feel like we should have assigned to these, I would want that feedback now.
Well, I kind of thought that, each one of these, if we spent only 5 minutes on one of these, we'll be here till late. And maybe, I'll just throw this out as a suggestion, is that we got a workshop coming up within a couple of weeks. Maybe we should dedicate the majority of that workshop conversation to each one of these items, because I think the residents are anxious about the, hard structure. What are we going to do with that, or what aren't we going to do with that? I'm hearing with the Army Corps, if I were on Front Beach right now and listening to where the Army Corps is, and we might be heading into another season, I'd want to know, do I have other options besides, sandbagging and bringing in my own sand? I just think we ought to have that conversation
Yeah.
sooner rather than later. And then now we're going to fund a major one.
So specifically, I guess on your next council packet, we have, so I would forecast that I think we will have the Beach Preservation Committee, the framework established. I would think that some of the membership, we may be able to have that stood up by your next meeting, probably would realistically be in March, when that would be ready to go. I think that we could have the firm giving a second opinion on all these issues. I think we should be able to get to that point where that's ready for a vote within the next 30 days. And I don't know that I may have skipped over this one, but we do have the issue of establishing an ordinance, I'm sorry, it's on page 57, prohibiting pools seaward of the max building line in this section of Ocean Boulevard. Those pools in that area have clearly been problematic. They're farthest seaward. That was one that there was unanimous agreement on in the Beach Ad Hoc Committee. Unless there's any reason not to, we could have that ready for your February packet to give first reading. Those would be kind of what happens in the foreseeable future. If that sounds okay, just general head nod is useful.
Yeah, and I know in our February workshop, we've got the community enrichment plan folks are coming too, so I know there'll be a significant chunk, so we may have to divide and conquer a little bit on what we can cover in one workshop. But to Scott's point, this is going to take some broader discussion than just a quick flyby tonight, obviously.
And I think we can also work with
I guess,
Stevens.
I guess we're going to talk about this, but one of the, seems like gates to get through to get some of these other things nailed down is a second opinion.
Right.
And I'm not going to argue with that. I think that was the committee's recommendation in some case. But I think that sense of urgency around getting that named, finding who it is, getting as fastest timeline on that second opinion as we can is pretty significant. And I know there was some talk, and I support that maybe this is the last task of the previous beach preservation committees, the current one. I think they've got the most experience. They've had the most discussion around this, kind of understand what the scope of work would be, and have them make a recommendation to council who that company would be that we would get the second opinion from.
Yeah.
Do that.
While the admin committee's putting together the framework for the new
For the
one.
next-
Because I think if you get a new one, it's going to take, not only is it going to take some time to get a new one, but it's going to take some time to get them up to speed, depending on the makeup of it, and they just don't have the history of what the other, the one that's been working a year on it. So I would suggest that they make a recommendation to council who they would suggest is the second opinion company.
we could,
And I guess, I don't know who the list of 8 that you've, potentially initially contacted, and if the range is, $20,000 to $50,000 for another, I don't want to bump any potentially really good firm out for a $20,000 delta in a potential fee, depending upon what the scope of work is. And maybe we do an up to the 50 or something to make sure that we've got all of these, if they're highly qualified firms. This is going to be a big assessment for what, Steve and his team have done a lot of work, but I don't want to cut that universe in half because of a couple of dollars, I guess is what I'm saying.
yeah, and that is specifically why we would use the request for qualifications
Yeah.
format instead of a request for
Qual-
proposals.
yeah.
It's, you will buy into the firm kind of first, and then get proposals from the ones you've whittled it down to. So when we don't want to go solely on cost, that's the process we go with.
So Douglas, how quickly could you get RFQs from these 8 firms? Is that something that can be done within a week or two?
Yeah, should be.
Well, maybe not a week.
I think we would do it right versus
Yeah, I think
faster.
before your
yeah.
next meeting, we could have, and potentially before your workshop, we could have, we have the firms, we have, like I said, at least kind of 8 firms identified. We could have their qualifications back by that time. But
Are these from all, are they all out of state or some of these out of state? And we talked about,
I think the direction we heard was that they all be from out of state.
Okay.
There could be, I think they all do work in kind of all states, but I think they're primarily from out of state, if not all from out of state. So, Rusty, does that answer your question? I think we.
Yeah, on that part of it. The other part is how long, once you choose someone, a firm, I mean, what's the scope of work we're looking for the second opinion? How long would that take?
So, and we've had a lot of conversations around this, and the way, and the pricing that's kind of in your packet assumes that they are not doing a ton of data gathering. So in other words, and that's their first question out of their mouth is, do you want us to gather all the data, do all the modeling, or do you want us to compile all of the data that's already, all the surveying data that's already been obtained and give basically a peer review second opinion on existing data? That is the path that I have thought the group would want, and that's the task that kind of has the $25,000 to $50,000 cost range. I think if you go beyond that and we get to a point where we're asking for the firm to collect the data, start kind of from scratch, I think it's a significantly longer
Yeah.
and more expensive
I
process.
think the feeling is we have pretty solid data, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that would also make it a much quicker turnaround from that perspective.
John?
Well, I'd also ask, I think this second opinion, I hope we're not, I guess I'm tempering the expectations a little bit, at least that I have, because in some degree, some of these questions are ideological. It's like climate change, right? You can go get a consultant to tell you that climate change is all man-made, and you can go find a consultant to tell you, oh, no, it's the natural, Earth's or universe cycle. I mean, there's lots of different opinions. You can go get a consultant to tell you what you want to hear in some cases. And some of these questions are like that to me, right? Like heart erosion control. I'm sure there's a consultant that'll tell you that they're horrible, and I'm sure there's a consultant out there that's going to tell you that they're great. And so I don't know, at some point you hear both sides of the story, and you have to make an opinion, what you think is right or wrong, or right for this particular island. And so I'm just, it could be just somebody that's going out and you're going to get a disciple that tells you the same thing that you already heard. And I don't know what our goal is here, I guess, is what I'm trying to determine by getting a second opinion.
And I would, respond to that, and there are five yellow cells on your sheet. 2 of them deal with heart erosion control. I think that those could, if you wanted to make those orange and just say, council, you kind of pull your information together as best you can with the information that you have and you will take a vote on it. That's what happened last year with the temporary ordinances. You could certainly do that. I just don't know that the group, I think you all have voted on this issue at least twice, maybe 3 times. And I don't know that there's been anything new or different that would be presented to the same group to get any different votes. So from a personal position, these were put as yellow solely to get kind of an outside look at what we have, the way we've managed it, and get an opinion to hopefully kind of to sway, because, you've kind of been in the same place, I think, for 3 votes. Well, maybe pendulum's gone back and forth a little bit, but that is solely,
Yeah, that's one issue, but there's other issues. I don't know if we're also expanding in, which would, to expand the timeline to me, is what, the inlet, breach inlet, is that, what's causing that, to be, the flow to be, changed? Is that in the scope of this?
would not be.
What's triggered the south end of the beach, the erosion on the south end, after numerous years of accretion? I don't know if we're getting back to root cause, or are we just validating what the committee has come up with recommendations? I guess that it's important to understand what scope
Yes.
we're having.
No, I think you're exactly right. And I think it's the last box in the beach restoration policies was specifically from the group, and it was to get a second opinion on emergency protective actions. So that specifically, we have had 2 years of work, and I will say, from the staff's perspective, we've learned a lot in those 2 years. We would want a professional to have that same look back and say, hey, maybe you should have done it this way, that way, not put the bags here, use these bags instead of those bags. Future beach renourishment programs. So that's our big scale projects, our medium scale projects, and our emergency projects. And then beach protection options. So that gets into, I think in our view, that gets into sandbags, seawalls, city funding it. So that was the recommendation of that group.
Okay.
They did not, kind of say, let's start looking at the inlets, or I think they saw those issues as being kind of settled. But, that, if council wants to kind of jump off into other places from the recommendation of the group, I think that certainly could also happen.
Okay. Mr. Mayor. What we are doing here is, I did this kind of work in a different field, but we're hiring expertise. We're not looking for bids here. So what we're doing is selecting a firm that we think has done this kind of work and understands the work that has been done. We're looking for a reasonable assessment of what the reports and conclusions and whatnot have been done. Not whether they're right or wrong, but whether they're reasonable in terms of best practices that have been used in other places, whether all the alternatives might have been considered that the expert that we hire has used in other places as well. Is it a thorough study that has been done? And then look at the list of recommendations, and this is where the other expert may be able to come up with, if there's something that they notice has not been considered, suggested. It isn't a matter of whether what's right or wrong, but has the broad spectrum of options and alternatives been considered and analyzed properly. I don't think we want the firm that we're hiring to reanalyze everything for us. That's beyond the scope of $30,000 for one thing. So it's a different approach than a bid project. You're not bidding out an item. What you're doing is getting somebody else's expertise just to look over Stephen's shoulder and say, yeah, we've done that way. That seems to be the way the field goes, what we do in this process. We've looked at a couple of other things somewhere else. You didn't look at those. You might want to look at that, but you've pretty much considered what we would have considered here or not, that kind of thing. So I think that's where we are with this. And as long as we get a well-qualified firm, they could probably do that overlook.
And I think the beach ad hoc committee can, wrestle through that scope and work with Douglas on getting the right firm in here to do what we need to do. Yeah.
And, oh, by the way, what you do is, after you've
Cindy.
selected the firm for the expertise, you sit down and you negotiate the contract with them. And it depends on sometimes how much money you have and how much work you want done. There's a balance there. And you work that out with the consultant afterwards, after being selected.
So Douglas, you ready to get approval for the second opinion, or do you have what you need from your list? Or not so
I
much?
think this is really for discussion. That's all been great feedback. There is a consideration of allocating $30,000 on your agenda. I would say this is going to come back to you based on this feedback as an actual proposal. So we'll go through the process as we've talked about and present an actual proposal for your approval with an actual amount. So I think that gives me what I need.
So for item C, is there a motion to approve?
Are you saying we need to, you want
Yes.
What are we approving?
Yes.
All right, motion to approve 30,000 and pending Douglas's update with the actual proposal.
Second,
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Douglas. Next item, consideration Administration Committee recommendation to appoint Rod Turnage to the ATAX Committee. You may recall there was a vacancy that opened up at 12/31 for the lodging spot on this committee. John, why don't you run admin at that point? You want to kind of walk through, you all looked at Rod and.
Yeah, I'd like to say that there was a second candidate for this. It's Ted McKnight, who has applied numerous times and for one reason or another isn't on the ATAX, but he has a strong, keen interest in being on the ATAX committee. But he also serves on the BOZA, the Board of Zoning Appeals Committee, and is a critical piece of that committee, does a great job. His term ends at the end of the year, this year. So I think at some point, his interest is to get to the ATAX committee, and I think he'd make a great committee member on that. So hopefully at some point, this council can get him on the committee of his choice. But right now, he's agreed, and he's doing a fabulous job on BOZA.
And you recall ATAX has specific slots that have to be filled. This one particular one is lodging, and I think a lot of you are familiar with Rod. So is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Next item is consideration of entering into an agreement with Heritage Links for an amount of $600,000 to incorporate flood protection work into the upcoming golf course renovation. This is for our broader Waterway Boulevard path elevation project. Douglas sent out a piece last week just to get you up to speed a little bit. I know there's a lot of numbers flying around, a lot of project pieces to it. Douglas, you mind walking through it
Yes.
at a high level and just kind of total cost
I'm
for
going
us?
to try to not make your head spin because it did make my head spin. I'm going to be talking from page 61 in your packet. And this is a cost sheet prepared by Thomas and Hutton. And it has on it, in the first column, what I'm going to call the first accounting column, it has what was presented to council back in June. And what happened in June is they presented a number of, it was about $4.5 million plus $1 million contingency. That was the full amount of this project. Council then, at that point, and there's another row of X's immediately adjacent to that. And these were very high-cost parts of that project that the staff felt like we could work to get that price down by working with individual property owners and coming up with a solution. Those were these expensive sheet pile walls on private property. We weren't sure if the owners would want them. And quite frankly, they made the project not cost-effective any longer. So that column got deleted at that meeting, And that left you with the, what I'm gonna call the third column, which had a total construction cost at the bottom in red of 1.725 million. And then a contingency of 431 for a total project of 2.1 million.
Okay.
So since that time, and recall that at that point of the project, this was very much a conceptual kind of line on the plans. They went to work developing full construction plans. So the next columns generated, and I'll just explain, well, we'll get to the colors here in a minute. But the cost of that project in Thomas and Hutton's mind ballooned from 1.7 million to 3.3 million, which is the next two columns, so 2.045 million and 1.126 million. So you add those two columns together, got to 3.3 million roughly. If you'll recall, there's a portion of this work that has to happen on the Wild Dunes Golf Course. That is in that, the Wild Dunes Golf Course is in that last column to the right. And they have actually got costs, they now have costing back from the Wild Dunes Golf Course contractor. And that has reduced down the portion of the work that Thomas and Hutton estimated at 1.26 million down to about 600,000. So for tonight's meeting, what is being requested is authorization to enter into an agreement for that work, which is in your packet at $521,000. However, that amount does not include the tide valves that we will need to buy. We get better pricing on those. It will also not, that also doesn't include any construction administration from Thomas and Hutton, which we would like to include. So we estimate that that this will get this portion of the project to 600,000. So that's what's on your agenda for approval tonight. But just keep in mind that there is an additional estimated $2 million. That work would happen in the future. So that would be next winter, we expect. Those permits are being applied for now. We think that we'll have permits in hand and able to go next winter. That is also the portion of the project that we already have $1 million grant from FEMA for that section. The grant has to specifically go for that section because it's in the public right of way. Can't use the grant money in the private golf course. So that's a lot of detail to get you to a point of what we're asking for.
Very clear, Douglas. Very good.
I apologize for that.
I was with you.
See,
and
were you
then
until when?
no, I might have followed.
Okay.
So is the total project now, the 2.1, I'm looking at your sheet, 2.156 with the contingency?
No.
No,
Wait a minute, I'm
you're
going
close.
to add something. I'm going to
You're
add
close.
something, and then I'm going to add the 600,000.
Yep, you're very close.
So that's 2.756.
Your
plus
starting point's 2045, actually.
That's correct.
The 2156 now becomes 2045?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
so,
Hang on.
okay.
But
They've
then,
lowered their contingency, Scott, based on the fact that started as a 25% contingency because no part of it had been designed. That new number is 2045.
Okay.
And that now has lowered the contingency to 10% because they've hopefully uncovered all of the issues that they were going to uncover, and they can refine that contingency.
so the 2045 is replacing the 2156?
That's correct.
Correct.
So you have
Okay,
to
because you
add-
mentioned another 2 million coming down for the future. Yeah, got it. You said that there's another 2 million, that's not on this sheet.
No, so the project is 2.045.
Got it.
For a future year and 600,000 for this year.
And does that take care of all do we now have the X's covered?
No, we don't. If you go back to the grid, we have successfully converted 2 of the X's. I'm sorry. Yes, 2 of the X's into the 600,000.
Which two?
So it is no, actually, it's the $247,000 X.
That's
And
now
this is
in?
that's now, what's now in the orange cells in the golf course work.
Okay, now all of this also says 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet. I thought we were trying, can you just explain that, is this 6 and the others are 7?
No, yes, that is 7, and if you look at the top of the very kind of top left cell, total project cost to achieve 7.0 NAVD 88.
So the notes haven't been changed, or
And where, I don't see the 6.
over on the
Right.
detailed design?
It's just 2 levels, 2 pieces.
One, yeah, it's mentioned a couple times here. Yeah.
Okay. This is another wrinkle. If you recall, in the June meeting,
I got an iron. No.
in the June meeting, the point was made, and it was a good point. If we pull out some of these expensive projects with an X, we don't want to leave a hole in our dike that is lower than our original target of 6. So while those X's pulled an amount out, they actually had to add in a little bit back into the project to achieve the minimum of 6. So in those places where there is an X, there could be a stopgap plan where that X doesn't get done immediately, but we know we would have at least 6.
But bottom line, it's it's roughly 2.7, and we got a $900,000 grant.
That's correct.
So we're going to cover 1.8.
That's correct.
Okay.
And you're gonna cover,
And that completes everything soup to nuts.
that's correct.
Okay.
I like how you explained it, Scott. That was much more succinct than what I did.
But our 1.8, has that gone up, or I couldn't remember what we were covering the last time.
Well, so you were at 1.7.
The red number in the second column.
Okay.
Yeah, you were at 1.7, and that number, in Thomas and Hutton's mind, went temporarily to 3.3, so it did go up significantly. But Heritage has dropped it back down to 2.6.
But and we got the grant for 900, so 2.7, grants 0.9, we got to cover 1.8.
That's correct.
And do we have that all earmarked on where we're getting it and all?
We do.
All
I
right.
think it's in our budget.
I didn't know, I thought that went up, it sounds like that went up a little bit from our last version, just that's all.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
The 600,000 is,
That's the increase.
well, that is in this year's budget. We have money for that. The additional, I don't know, and Deborah can speak to this, I don't know that she knows exactly where the additional,
I'm just saying capital projects, because we had to use the ARPA money, needed to be committed
correct.
before the end of the year. So this originally had ARPA money decked against it. Now it's capital project
that's
funds.
correct.
And when you said there's future, that's beyond the 600 that you're talking about. There's not anything above the 2.7 out there. In other words, 2.7 gets us done.
Correct. Between,
Minus the X's, which are still to be worked out, which we don't think will be much.
But those
Based
X's
on
have
having-
millions of dollars in them right now.
Yeah, we anticipate.
Thomas and Hutton,
They were
I
doing
think it
that
was
with
a
sheet
catalog.
pile walls.
Yeah.
We anticipate doing that with earthen berms. We've met with a number of those owners, they're agreeable to it. So we think there will be a marginal increase to clear out the X's, but not a huge amount. But that's a little bit yet to be determined.
Can we get a clean version of this at the workshop, maybe? Updated, kind of?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Hey,
It is very tough for them to quantify Heritage's amounts against, and, because I spent 2 days with them trying to get this done, to basically fill in the dollar amounts in those color-coded columns. They couldn't do it. They couldn't get because the Heritage quote isn't laid out this way. So it wasn't an easy translation over.
I guess to that point, but am I correct in reading this, that the Thomas and Hutton original quote for the extra work was 1.266 million? And the contractor quote came in at 600?
Yeah.
correct.
Yes.
So it's half of what
For
they,
that portion of the work, that's
Yeah.
correct.
I mean, that's a huge difference.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and they've said, so a lot of that happened because they designed, they initially, and they do this.
They,
planned-
Thomas and Hutton.
Thomas and Hutton planned for public level of infrastructure, which is large-scale concrete pipe. When they got into the project, the golf course said, you know, this is beyond what we use on golf courses. We use plastic pipe, we use, you know, we're not anticipating 18-wheelers driving over. So the scale of the materials came significantly down. They've also indicated that pricing in general appeared to be trending down, so a multitude of issues contributed to that. But
Is
yeah,
there some upside in the 2.045 too, to go the same way?
They didn't want to tell me that,
Yeah.
but they forecast that if things continue the way they are currently, that 2.045 could be coming down.
All right.
Jan, do you have a question, or you? Good. Is there a motion for this approval?
So move.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Thank you, Douglas. Next item is consideration of awarding a contract to Drexel Hill Services for painting the exterior of the rec center for $56,000. You'll see we had it budgeted at 50. There were, I think, 3 bids, Douglas, or 4 bids in our packet. Is there a motion?
So move.
Second.
Douglas, anything to add?
No, just
To
that
this
the
here.
pricing was slightly above what was expected because of concerns over adhering, so they've added an additional layer. So in the budget was 50, it's come in at 56, and that's because of a little bit more work anticipated.
But one of the bids was 3 times that, I think,
Yeah.
wasn't it? Yeah.
I'd just like to make a comment.
Yep.
We have used Drexel Hill for a number of paintings of our house over the years. They are a good firm. They have a large staff, so they can get the work done quickly, very well, and if you have any issues afterwards, they are right back to make changes and whatnot,
Yeah.
so.
And Scott, I think you've had similar
We've
experience.
used them as well. They're very good.
We've got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Next item, boards and commissions report. Board of Zoning Appeals, minutes are attached. Planning Commission, minutes are attached. ATAX, no meeting in January. Environmental Advisory Committee, minutes are attached. Ordinances, resolutions, and petitions, second reading, none. First reading, ordinance 2025-01 for parking. I would recommend that we defer this until after our executive session. Is there a motion to reorder?
Motion to reorder agenda.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Next then is Resolution 2025-01, a resolution to adopt parking fees.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Scott, you want to waive the reading? Or would you-
Waive the reading.
Thank you. And Jan, you good with that second?
I second that.
Douglas, you want to walk through the resolution, or is it kind of, I know we've talked about it
Yeah,
on a
we've
couple of
talked
different
about this.
occasions.
I will say that you all kind of reviewed this in your workshop. Nothing to update from that time, other than there were a couple of typos about the dates that I think Rusty picked out that should be corrected in the resolution in your packet, which it is. These came after a discussion that you all had with PCI, so this is kind of the final product of that discussion. And these would be in place starting in March.
Good. Let's get a motion and a second on the floor.
Okay.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Jan?
Just one comment, and that is that there has been some questions and discussion about, we have, these new parking fees do not include an annual pass. And I think that is something that we can bring up to consider with the Public Safety Committee at another time and add it in later if necessary, if we decide.
Before
to.
season, yeah.
Yeah.
Jimmy?
People I've talked to have looked at it and said, well, they understand where the fee increase is needed, but they it has a perception that's a huge increase, and wondering if council is considering doing that every year. This much of an increase. Or are we just catching up to where we should have been in the first place?
I think we're just matching the county lot for the most part.
Matching the county lot for the most part. Okay, that's what I'm telling them.
Yeah.
Other, Douglas, anything else to add? You good there? Other questions, comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Next item, Resolution 2025-02, a resolution to create the Beach Preservation Committee. We talked about this earlier. This would go to the admin committee for fleshing out and putting some framework around it on how you get nominated or volunteered for that. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve?
Second.
Any discussion, questions, edits? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Next item, executive session to receive legal advice about parking ordinances, receive updates on all pending cases, and discuss employment matters, specifically the appointment and compensation of the city administrator. Upon returning to open session, council may take action upon matters discussed in executive session. Is there a motion?
Motion to go in executive session.